So I'm Steve Hassan, and
Good
introduce
to meet you.
yourself for the
I'm
recording, please,
okay.
Laurel.
I'm Coral Annika Thiell, and I'm a former member of the People of Praise community in Corvallis, Oregon. And I'm also an author, advocate, speaker, and military reporter. And
Yeah,
I'm a domestic violence, rape, and ritual abuse victim and survivor. And last years, I've been writing and assisting other victims. And the last few years, a contributing writer for Leatherneck Magazine at Quantico and Short Rations for Marines. And then New York published my story of surviving marital rape. And that book is called Reclamation.
great. Good for you. And were you in the military?
My father was Air Force, but after I got safe in a divorce 23 years ago from my ex-husband, I was starting to meet a lot of veterans. They were reading my book, and I ended up doing volunteer work at veteran hospitals and
I see.
Monaco, going up to Walter Reed and writing with and for wounded warriors. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Good work. And vets don't get enough credit and they don't get enough
Yes,
services.
especially PTSD, TBI. I did an article on that called Invisible Battle Scars,
Great.
confronting the stigma associated with PTS and TBI, and I interviewed the Commandant, James Amos. And
Wonderful. So another time, I'll talk to
yes,
you about my work
sure,
as a therapist with PTSD and
yes,
what I found is helpful and all that good stuff. So thank you for consenting to do this with me. I was approached to comment on the People of Praise for because of Judge Barrett's potential nomination to the Supreme Court. And I have, of course, heard of People of Praise over the decades, but I needed to refresh my memory. And
yes.
reading the links you shared with me helped to bring back a lot. And so I
Yes.
thank you for sharing that. And I guess I want to start by saying, why do you think it's a cult? If I
Well,
may.
I'll tell you a quick answer to that. Reporters just said, "Why didn't you just leave?" And I said, "Because they did not allow me to leave." I was humiliated, shamed publicly, put on the floor outside of meetings. I was pushed in a car and hauled after a DNC surgery after miscarriage that night to all the cult leaders to be interrogated till the wee hours of the morning when I was supposed to be having bed rest. I was then, after that night, I must not have answered correctly because the next morning my husband got a call and the entire community was ordered to shun me. It wasn't even the community, it was the Corvallis community because they had friends and counselors, priests at St. Mary's Catholic Church. I tried to get help even within the church. Everybody was all pretty cozy with the community, People of Praise community. And so there was no help other than me writing. And I still have the journals from that time. I just was writing and writing. And then they were telling me I was mentally ill. And then at the same time, while my husband wouldn't even speak to me in the home for many months, I was forced to go to meetings with him, but I was not allowed in the meeting and put on the floor outside. And even years later, people have read my book that are no longer in the community and they say how horrible that was, but nobody helped me. They just walked by me like it was business as usual. And I was an example to the others of what they do to you if you do not conform. And
Yep.
I questioned. And so there was a lot of abuse. And then they started turning my 4 young children against me, just one day away to talk to my brother about getting safe. I came back and my children were looking at me as I was evil. And that has gone on. And so years later, I eventually lost all 8 children, even my nursing baby in a divorce. And even though I've passed 6 4-hour psychiatric exams and many other exams to prove my mental wellness, they will still call me crazy and mentally ill. My ex-husband in court, I've been in 50 court hearings because he legally stalks me, but he'll call me crazy and mentally ill in court. And my children also smear my name too. So
That is so horrible. And I've
those
worked
are
with,
small examples. There are worse, but those are the light.
that's terrible. I'm so sorry that you've had to go through this horror show. And I have worked with other people who've been victims of parental alienation because of
Yes.
involvement with an authoritarian group.
Yes.
where one parent leaves and the children are indoctrinated to believe
Right.
mommy or daddy are
Yes.
invaded by Satan and,
Right.
are mentally ill. There's a whole long list. If you probably
Yes.
seen my chapter 10 of Freedom of Mind, I have a whole chapter on phobias and the most
Okay.
common phobias that I've worked with in my 40 plus years. And all I can say is you're brave, you're courageous. Thank you for being you and for holding your integrity to speak out. And
Thank you.
my life mission of 44 years is to educate the public to understand this is a real thing.
I appreciate you. You
Mhm.
were one of the first sites, when I got a computer access, even after my divorce, I wasn't allowed contact with the computer, wasn't allowed contact with friends or my family. And even another signature of a cult, I'll share one example because I know the AP wants to talk about people praised in the years I was there. It was in 1984. My father, at 54, he was a pilot in Vancouver, Washington. He ended up in the hospital in emergency, and I knew my dad would never be in a hospital unless it was incredibly serious. And I asked my husband, I wanted to go see him. I knew my father wasn't going to last through the night, and my husband wouldn't let me. And my father died that night.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
29, and I was still in the cult. I was being shunned at the time because I would not comply with all their rules. But I think a few people came to my father's funeral from the cult, and they talked to my husband, but not me because I was being shunned. So I didn't have a lot of rights. I had no rights to my body. I could not use contraceptives. I had every baby my ex-husband believed I should have. And a few years even after the People of Praise cult, I lost my eyesight for a while. It did eventually heal, but my eyes were taped closed. Had 4 young children, and the eye doctors at the KCI Institute in Portland asked my husband not to get me pregnant. They were still trying to figure out how to help me, and he followed no other dictate other than what he wanted to do. And I was pregnant.
And you said, no, I don't want to. And he
Yeah, I wanted to
raped
try
you.
to heal, but you had no right to your body. And I write on my website an article called I Live the Handmaid's Tale, a
Mm.
sketch of Marty Warner in 1996. And in the community, the People of Praise community, we were handmaids and we were called handmaids. And I had a head who was my husband, who I was under absolute authority. He would not allow me to work outside the home. I could not see my doctor alone. And eventually I had to homeschool the children, home birth, and have no outside contact. But I also had a head. Her name was Connie Hackenbrook of Corvallis, Oregon. And she's the one that reported me when I could not go shopping with them and obey her dictates. And then each single woman had a head in the community who was assigned to them.
So that sounds like shepherding, discipling
Yes,
cults.
Bill Gothard. A lot of the community members go to get Bill Gothard also. And then the signature was they spoke in tongues. Father Charles Harris was from South Bend. He was their chaplain at Oregon State University on the university. And that's how many of the young members met when they were going to college. They then believed they were baptized in the Holy Spirit and speaking in tongues. So they all felt they wanted to share this unique experience together in a community. And for many of them, it's a pretty egotistical thing. The rest of us are on our way to hell. They're the remnant, and everybody else has no truth. And then I have some of their taped teachings. I even have a copy of their marriage um, vow of loyalty. I published it in my book, and I have a copy of it. But I didn't.
I'd be interested in looking at that.
Yeah, it's in the book on between pages 15 and 31 of my
I
book.
don't have your book yet, but I will order
Well,
it.
it's online free at my website. It's the second link down. It's
Okay.
the PDF files for free, but it's between pages 15 and 31, but the loyalty vow is there. But a lot of people, like you write, I think this is one of your quotes, that it's like a psychological gun held to the head after enough gaslighting, after enough threats, after enough humiliation, brainwashing, and indoctrination. People feel they'll lose their soul.
Yes.
The cult.
Yeah.
I know, I keep calling it a cult. I know professionally, and I know the politicians will address it as a community, but I lived it. I survived it. I lived the horrors, and I've been calling senators, and I'm doing what Phil Kearns did. He wrote People's Temple, People's Tomb. Are you familiar with that book?
I've heard of it, but I don't think I've read
Well,
it.
his family member was in the James Jones cult and was in Ghana, Ghana,
Guyana, yeah.
and he knew they were going to do what they did. He knew, and he called every politician he knew, and they just dismissed him. And Jim Jones was very embedded with a lot of politicians and famous people.
I know a lot about People's
Yes,
Temple.
and his family member died.
Yeah, so
It's like
sorry.
right now I'm sounding alarms, and a lot of my friends and acquaintances are alarmed. And I'm calling senators. I'm not sure if they will be, but I hope that they will ask questions. And even though this happened a year ago, it's the same as if I had been raped a long time ago. These scars did not go away. I have healed for the most part by works such as you and other people who write wonderful books like this, but there's been no apologies. I've been treated horrifically.
But you don't have your kids. Your kids are not.
I have not been with them since I left in 95. My doctor, Dr. Charles South of Albany, Oregon, he knew I was being abused. And I had 2 miscarriages during the years I was in the People Praise cult back to back. And my health was failing. I was on heart monitors at times. I was having panic attacks, which I had never had. Before I married, I had my solo license as a pilot at age 17 in Vancouver, Washington. I was a straight A student, valedictorian in my class. I was a court reporter by age 19 for the juvenile court. And but I was abused by this predator, my husband, and it was abusive before I married him. And throughout my young childhood, I had been sex trafficked by my mother and grandparents to my great uncle, who was a murderer and a rapist. So even though I
Was
had
he involved with the group as well?
no, my family not, but that was my beginning. So they say there's like a red X on your forehead. You lose your voice at a young age when you have those type of experiences. But I've done a lot to heal too, for the most part. But when people say that was a long time ago, no, it's like yesterday. When I'm talking to you, it still traumatizes me.
I'm so sorry. That's the last
So
thing I want.
I
Is,
know no, I'm fine. Talk
oops, you froze
online
for a
last night.
second, Coral.
I saw a video online last night by a former cult member of another cult, and she was just thanking me for going on Democracy Now. And we don't have a large voice out there. We just are casualties.
I'm afraid I know very well.
Yes.
So I just want to say that you're familiar with my influence
Yes.
continuum
I'll fill it out after.
and the bite model. And I just want to say the way I think about the word cult is a cult is a group of people that have very intense beliefs and
Yes.
passionate about it. But I say there are healthy cults where you
Yes.
know what you're getting into and you're free to leave and you're free to question and you're free to read whatever you want to read. And there's no
Yes.
fear about leaving. And
Right.
then there's the authoritarian cults
Correct.
that are all about guilt and fear and control of behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions to keep people dependent and obedient. So I just wanted to add that to the
Thank you.
video. But can you tell me
Another
how old were
feature.
you when you first were exposed to this group, Carl?
This group, before this group, I'd gone to Bill Gothard's seminars because a lot of my teachers in high schools and student friends, he was kind of a wave, which was cultish. I was left at his institute to be exercised for demons years later, for God to break me, I guess. But I was 24. I had just had my twins, identical twins, and I was 24 through 29. My husband was 6 years older, so he was 6 years older than that for those
And
5.
so were you married in the group, People for Praise?
I was married before that, a couple years before that,
Got
and
it.
I did not take their marriage loyalty vow. I was there when many of them did, and I did have a copy of it, but I did not. I was still I think, in the shunning stage of being shunned at that time. So
So you had been traumatized and abused prior to Bill
very,
Gothard, and then you got recruited
Yes.
into People of Praise. Did you get in and get your husband in, or did he get in?
No, my husband was very drawn to it due to the authoritarian feature of the absolute submission of women. And that's something my husband talked to me even when we were dating, that he was didn't like it when he saw his father on the couch, and when he was growing up in the home, he said, nobody's ever going to do that to me, and you will be absolutely submissive. And in my own growing up years, I had to be absolutely submissive or else. And the or else was pretty awful. So I didn't have land legs. I did not have role models. I did not have counselors. So you just try to figure out day by day. And then there's a lot of shaming that is involved. Even his own family was a part of some of that. And even afterwards, they've supported him since my divorce. And many of them are Eucharistic ministers in Catholic churches, but they have been with him the full um, realm of, I call it enabling a predator and condoning.
Yeah, and as far as you know, are the practices you were exposed to in effect to this day in People for Praise?
Well, I just met somebody a year ago that's still affiliated with some of the people who abused me, and I thought he and his wife were safe. And so I came to Oregon for a few days just to see how I felt, if I felt safe enough to come back. He wanted to see me, and he hadn't been in the cult for years. So I thought, okay, this seems relatively safe. But then when he started interrogating me, I, of course, stayed true to my being. And when people start asking me, are you reading the Bible? Do you have a personal relationship with Jesus? Are you doing this? A lot of times I'll say, it's more important what you believe. I don't feel I have an obligation for them to interrogate every
That's
doctrinal
not,
belief. And so I just shared a little bit of what I've been doing. I've lived on Native American reservations, supporting people who've been raped in Catholic Indian boarding schools. I've lived
sure.
next door to pluralistic marriage Mormon communities, supporting the women abused. I've supported wounded warriors. And I said, I believe in respect and compassion. That was not the right answer. And he covered his wife's eyes. We went to the car. I went in their home. They wouldn't look or talk to me, and they went to their back room. And I just eventually wrote a thank you note and left. But they're friends with the People of Praise group that have abused me, and he knows that. So it. I'll just say that happened just maybe 9 months ago, and I go, okay, well, I guess that's how that works, and you just move on. But it's a very ugly way to treat people, and when I share it with friends, but I'm used to it. It's like I can still go in Corvallis, Oregon, and if women see me, they'll turn their children and their cart around, cover their kids' eyes like I'm some leper. And I'm used to it. And that's how I was treated back in the 80s, early 90s. Their children and my children were going to the same Lutheran school in Corvallis, Oregon. And the women wouldn't look at me. My children were no longer allowed to play with their children. So it's a pretty quick freeze out. And but they still, I'm associated with some of the people, I guess, that still know them, and they seem to all need to treat me that way still. So,
It's terrible.
oh
Yeah,
well,
people can walk out of a cult, but unless they get the proper psychological counseling and understand mind control,
right.
they're still carrying the imprints of the indoctrination in their head.
I agree.
Yeah. So that's what I do for a living. I help people
Yes,
recover and
that's
advise
wonderful.
families who are worried about someone who's gotten involved with one of these situations. They've witnessed a radical personality change, and the person is now fanatical or very deceptive, and giving over their money and wealth.
Yes, we were asked to give our deed to our home, the community. They didn't give their deeds to their home. We were, and I had work too to put monies into the home, and I didn't want to do that, but my husband did. And supposedly we're all going to live in this very inexpensive apartment complex in a very bad area. And I thankfully, many months later, the deal fell through. So
Mhm.
not lose our home. But there was many things like that, and you do tithe to them. Some of the monies I think went back to South Bend, but there were many rules, and
Who's running the group as far as you know?
um, well, I do know people that's left. I think a Phil Monaco, he goes to St. Mary's Catholic Church, and Ed Brown. Ed Brown was my ex-husband's head, and he was one man that abused me and interrogated me. Ed Brown and Phil Monaco, I believe are two people still there. There's maybe only 50 people now in that with children. Some people have passed away and they donated their home to some of the children of the cult, that they all live in a large home. So
Sure.
the children stay in it, and there's benefits to it. Uh,
Mhm.
I know a lot of people make a lot of decisions due to money, and I'll just give an example. I confronted my mother and grandmother when I got away from my husband about them sex trafficking me for years as a young child, and they were very upset with me. They weren't sorry about it, and I
Did
hear
they admit it?
yes, and I even have a letter from my mother, but she gave my inheritance. My brother died, mother and grandmother, all 10 years ago, and I had taken care of my mother. I'd worked for my parents as a high school girl to keep their home. My dad was ill for a while, and she left me $1 and gave my cousin our entire inheritance. My cousin Beverly Murky in Walla Walla is a Catholic. My physicians, mentors, friends wrote her because I live under poverty. I have gone through court 50 times in Oregon and lived in my car 3 years. Many years I haven't had a car. And they said, could you just be compassionate? She did nothing but speak her truth and confront, and they were upset. I feel I was probably written out of the will many, many years ago, and same with my grandmother. But at the last months of my mother's life, I did talk to her. I don't know if that's the right thing to do. Many times, as a spiritual being, you choose the high road.
I think that's always a
Yeah.
wise
Yeah,
move.
you don't want to have regrets, but it got pretty traumatic at the end. And I was even on the phone with her as she was dying, but she still was not sorry. She still was acting the same way to me as she did. It was like the Carrie movie or Mommy Dearest, kind of a combo. So that took me a long time to heal coming out of that. But I'm just sharing that even the people in the people of praise, there's benefits when they stay. Maybe they have a home. Maybe they wouldn't have that home if they left. For me, I'd rather live in my car, which I have done.
Yeah, of course.
My ex-husband has a $500,000 estate and makes huge money as an engineer, and he still sued me for double that I earned while I was living out of my car. But I'm just saying I lost my inheritance with my mother and my grandmother just due
Yeah,
saying,
that's terrible.
this is hurtful. Um, you
So
know,
I wanted to ask you, Coral, with other cults that I've worked with, destructive authoritarian cults, when there's someone who's kind of a celebrity, whether they're an actress or whether they're a musician or politician or whatever, the cult would always give them extra leeway to act, more normal
yes,
than regular members. Because I'm
yes,
wondering about Judge Barrett
yes.
and what kind of life she is living if she's affiliated with this.
Excellent question. I think there's a class sections in cults. I was on the bottom, very bottom.
Uh-huh.
I had no rights, and I was under incredible scrutiny just because I asked questions, intelligent questions, questions I even have now, but they were coming out. I couldn't help it. I was authentic then. I am authentic now, but I was deemed mentally ill for those questions. So then they put me in every Saturday special sessions with Father Charles Harris from South Bend. And those were unpleasant, and they made me feel smaller. That's the intent. But with Judge Barrett, I believe they use people in these type of cults. Like my ex-husband, I believe some of the leaders of the Corvallis people of praise are engineers at Hewlett Packard too, and that gives them credibility. These are people who graduated, who have fine jobs, maybe homes. They go to St. Mary's Church, looks good with her too. Now her husband has allowed her to work, but I do believe if she's a member, she's in submission to him. And I often wonder when she's making judgments as a Supreme Court justice, does she pass that through with him? Because in this cult, you are absolutely fully submissive to your husband. And I
She
couldn't,
had to get permission from her husband to be a
I would
judge. Oops, you
work.
froze for a
But
second.
I feel for her, the danger is the entire ideology of this cult. Like you showed that chart, they're on that authoritarian end. And it is embedded and imprinted in their minds. That's how they think. That's how they view other people as less than. The us and them mentality that is even in patriarchal religion creates the violence in our society. And I know in our community here in Corvallis, gays were not accepted. There was a family that had a gay son. I remember my husband and some of his friends' words about that. It hurt me. I did not believe like that. And that's why I knew I was on my way out eventually, but I didn't want to lose my children. So it took a few more years. But if I don't want more Matthew Shepard cases, I don't want to be that kind of hate. And for me, as a child victim of rape, as a teenager victim of sexual assault, and as a married woman of marital rape, I want me, my doctor, my good counselors to make those decisions, not Judge Amy Barrett and older white men. No,
And I
I
guess
don't want to go backwards. I don't want to be a handmaid's tale. I don't want to be back walking down the street saying under his eye. It is like the Handmaid's Tale series. And when I watched it, I always knew what was going to go on the next week because I have 5 years of tutoring experience in the People Praise community.
Yeah, right. So I'm curious what Judge Barrett, if she told her husband a certain case she was working on. I know this is just pure speculation, but if she shared a particular case that she needed to do a decision on, and she was thinking it should be this, and the husband was thinking it should be this, what do you think she would do?
Well, if you're a good handmaid in that community, you obey your husband in all things.
And
That is the correct
wouldn't
answer.
she have a head also aside from the husband?
He has a head.
He would have a head.
She's a married woman, so her husband is her head. He has a head. That person has a head, and then there's one. Just like Father Charles Harris was the total head of our Corvallis branch.
Because that for me is shepherding or discipling.
Yes.
You know, that you have to submit and obey your discipler or your shepherd as if they were Jesus, and they have to submit their discipler or their shepherd as if they were Jesus, and it goes straight up a pyramid. Does that sound like?
Yes, and even the Bill Gothard Institute, which runs somewhat cultish and is under incredible authoritarian, they even had sexual molestation, scandals.
But Bill Gothard's separate from People for Praise,
yeah,
correct?
But a lot of the People of Praise members have gone to it. It's just very similar, and it helps, I think, lead you into something like the People of Praise. But
I see.
Being a senator, I think your question is incredibly just a good question, and they should be asking her that. Now, if she'll answer honestly, I don't know. And that's, who's going to be honest? I do not know, but I hope they'll ask her some difficult questions. And I and many others are just alarmed that a cult member would be a Supreme Court justice.
So in the moon cult that I was in, we were trained that the outside world was satanic, and we were doing God's will, and we were trying to save everybody by basically bringing them into the group. And then if they didn't want to join the group, they were lost basically, and we thought nothing about, I wouldn't say as a Moonie I would think I was lying, but doing heavenly deception to God's cause for the greater good, that to lie. And that's so opposite what judges are supposed to be about and what the legal system is supposed to be about, that it's even shocking that she is a judge at all, to me.
At all. That's the bottom line. That's what
my opinion.
Yes.
If you're a woman and you're in an authoritarian community and you are told that you have to be submissive to your husband, that takes away your, as you said, your integrity, your
Yes.
conscience, your ability to judge for yourself.
And the people of praise community, a lot of our teachings week after week, we were in Sunday meeting, Tuesday night meeting, Wednesday meetings, Thursday meetings, Saturday community group. So it was very busy, but they'd say they are the fresh water. Outside, even your neighbors, is the poison water. So you need to be filling all the time with the fresh water.
Fresh water, seriously?
Waters. They were the fresh water. Everybody on the outside was the poison, even your own family. So you had limited contact with your own family.
That's only if they were not in the group.
Right. Yeah. There was some that I think.
And how many days a week were meetings
Well, there was
required?
we went to church on Sunday morning at St. Mary's, then Sunday night, several hours of it'd be praying. People were prophets and they'd prophesy, speak in tongue, the teachings. And then Tuesday night was women's night meetings. Thursday night were men's night meetings. Then there was youth meetings. Then there was Saturday, sometimes community service or other meetings. So you were kept pretty busy besides just your household, and no excuse. Like I had surgery here in Albany, Oregon, miscarriage, DNC, pretty serious. And I came home hoping to go to bed, but I was forced to go to the women's meeting. They were going to go shopping, and I couldn't do that. So I go home and I am in trouble. Pushed in, right? It's called kidnapping. I did not want to go. A cult member, Bruce Breen, was at our home watching our 3 young children, and I was hauled off in front of all the cult leaders. I was going to share even the Vancouver branch of the People of Praise in Washington. They came down to abuse me also. And if my husband during my shunning months ever wanted to go anywhere with the other men and would possibly take our 3 or 4 young children at the time, they'd have women come from the Vancouver branch to stay in my home to watch me, make sure I maybe didn't call somebody or see somebody. And they'd put me in the car and haul me off to the women's retreat that I did not want to go to, but none of them could talk to me. So I was being forced to go to retreats where I was being shunned, but I couldn't be at home alone. And the Vancouver branch sent women down to watch me. I have something too, even to talk to you about, and a question. I've often thought of her, Judge Amy Barrett, and the founding fathers. And I believe the founding fathers thought of the Constitution as a living, breathing document. Maybe some people don't think that, but we have evolved. We have evolved slowly, too slowly, but I believe they hoped we'd evolve. Her, as our Supreme Court Justice, we will go back at least 100 years, and all human rights, not just women, not just choice, all human rights. Because in that community, everyone is the them, they are the us, and it's just branded in your mind. It's arrogant. And a lot of fundamental legalistic groups that are patriarchal are arrogant and egotistical. So I'm very concerned, and not just for women, it's for all people's rights.
And I spoke with a former member earlier today who talked about being hit with a wooden spoon, beaten with a belt. And I was telling her that corporal punishment is something that's been studied scientifically by mental health experts. It's traumatizing. It does brain damage to children.
It does.
And
Alice Miller is one of my favorite authors on that.
Agreed. I told her about David Cooperson's wonderful book, The Holocaust Lessons. I invited him to speak at my forensic think tank at Harvard Medical School. David was a child protective advocate, social worker for 32 years, and he wrote this really wonderful book summarizing all the research of why corporal punishment is so traumatizing on children. And he's retired, but he has a website, stoplegalchildabuse.com. And he's advocating to make it illegal to beat children. You know, and most of the civilized world has already understood that it's bad, and they've stopped, but not in America.
No, fundamental Christianity is holding on to that one as their
so I'm in a doctoral program. I'm close to finishing, and I'm really wanting the law to understand authoritarian control and how damaging it is to people. And I think it's a better term than brainwashing or thought reform or mind
Yes.
control, authoritarian control. And
Yes.
it's so opposite the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the healthy side of the continuum.
Yes. Yes. It's
Authoritarian
great.
control is the dark, evil side.
Yes.
So, did they try to do exorcisms on you?
Yes. I've been exercised for demons for years, ever since I've been married with my husband until right before I left him. They were even threatening my younger daughters were raped in our home while I was ill with a postpartum depression and sometimes out of the home. After my home birth in 93, I had no medical care. I hemorrhaged, and just 6 months later, without sleep for years and 8 different cults and a lot of abuse, beatings, mental abuse, I collapsed. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm a human being, and there was nothing left of me at 38 years old. So I was not allowed to see doctors alone, so they had to dismiss me. And for 20 months, I was in a very bad state of nearly catatonic. I was impregnated twice, lost one baby, and woke up 5 months along, like the Diana Ross movie, Out of the Darkness.
Oh
I came
boy.
home, and my daughters report the rapes. And then his pastors, one of them, Pastor Bill Hurd from Roseburg, Oregon, and local pastors in Monmouth, they threatened me that I could not report. And I said, priests, pastors, teachers, police, parents, they're required by law to report. My daughters need to get to a doctor. My older son needs help.
Who were they raped by, if I can ask?
Older son in the home. My mother-in-law, Helen Warner, was taking care of the children off and on while I was out of the home because I could not feed myself off and I couldn't clothe myself, but I was pregnant during that time. He also believed me in a catatonic condition. His sexual desire was more important. So my brother would get me dressed. My husband would drive from Independence, Oregon to Dallasport, Washington, pick me up, me to a motel, and rape me. And I was dropped off then. But when I came back in the home in January of 95, I was 5 months along, and my daughters within months told me. And my son was being exorcised for demons by Pastor Bill Hurd from Roseburg. I was being threatened to be put in the Oregon Mental Hospital because I was not cooperating with their plan. And that's when I called Addie Archer, my long-term friend, who was a court reporter in Longview, Washington. I said, I need you to come down. I need to get to an attorney to report this. And then that attorney knew I was under incredible harm. And he said, well, first we need to get you safe, and then we'll report the other crimes. And then the restraining order was overturned by a judge who's won victim advocacy awards, of course. He overturned the restraining order, and I then had to go into hiding. I couldn't stay in a home and block the door, live for months before the divorce behind a blocked door with a nursing baby and young children.
What a nightmare. You're so courageous.
I recorded it in my book. The Oregonian, Gazette Times, nobody's all wanted to write about it, but I have been interviewed by an attorney from the US Department of Justice when they were working on a documentary. New York, they published my story of marital rape in the book to help raise money for rape victims. And I've been on radio and helped victims, male, female, wounded warriors, whoever is in my life. But that was very difficult.
Oops, you just froze. Sorry.
Yes, that's what happens in an authoritarian marriage. I was left in the ghetto of Portland, Oregon in 94 during the period I could not speak or dress myself. I was in a severe postpartum depression and possibly a partial stroke, but I couldn't see any doctor or professional because my husband would not allow me to see anybody alone. But Pastor Bill Hurd was in my husband's life. He had dropped me off at Bill Gothard. They all thought I needed to be in a halfway house with ex-cons straight out of the state prison that was infested with rats. So I stayed there a long time alone for God to break me, they said. And so these things just get worse.
I'm so sorry.
The type of people that are
If
in
you
these
don't mind, I'd like to come back to people of praise
Sure,
in the remaining moments.
Yes.
And for people who've never experienced the deliverance, because I work with many people who have been so-called exorcised, and it's a pretty traumatizing event where people are around you. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but they're speaking in tongues and they're casting out demons, and you're lying on the floor?
Most of the time I was sitting, and it was always men, and I always felt that they knew it was their way instead of possibly hitting me. Or they used to just burn witches. It was their way to put me in my place, to make me feel small, for them to feel more than
How
me.
long would it go on, Coral, typically?
Oh, just sessions. I don't know, it could be minutes, it could be a half hour, but it was always, especially while I had a depression, I couldn't help that. It'd been years, decades of harm. And I believe the universe just shut me down for a while, and that was okay. Um,
Mhm.
recommend it to anyone. It's a horrible experience, and you have to really work at your health to come back. It's almost like digging out of a grave. But they always, because I could not do my 20-hour-a-day job and everything I had done, raising the 8 children, then something was wrong with me, and they got to fix it with casting demons out, telling me I had a Jezebel spirit, and always. Pastor Bill Hurd of Roseburg, Oregon, he is a pastor of a Baptist church there, and other women have written me who've been abused by him. He helped my husband take my children away from me, and he forced me to get down on my knees in front of him and my husband and repent that I had not learned to be submissive enough. And that's God was punishing me, and that's why I was unwell. And so it's always this, our society in America, this is what we're good at. We blame and shame victims, and that needs to end.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, and when you're in one of these groups where you think you're doing God's will and everything else is Satan, and you're invoking God's will to get rid of demons and it doesn't work, the person's not, oh, I'm great now,
Right.
then it's their fault, not
It's their fault.
the whole structure.
Even my children, who were young adults then, they were teenagers, and they just look at me and say, if you just would repent, you'd be well and get to do your chores again. And they were told to talk that way. And my
Yeah.
mother-in-law, who was a Catholic, and I had left the Catholic faith because the pastor, priests there were just as they were supportive of the people praise and the abuse I'd suffered. So there was nowhere to go. And I left, but she'd always look at me when I was ill with my postpartum depression and just said, if you'd been a good Catholic like me, God would not have done this to you. So I had people in my face every day, all the time,
Mhm.
who were in charge of my mental illness, who were abusers, who were predators, and who were sociopaths.
Yeah, terrible.
Anyway,
So, I would like to ask if you're willing to go through the bite model and
I will.
apply it to the best of your ability to
Okay.
say yes or no or
Okay.
partially. Of course, cults have different, um, people here are going to have a very different experience than people are here or here or here.
Okay.
But to be able to explain to the public, this is not healthy, this is not normal, that people's human rights are being violated in these
Yes, they are.
organizations. Their God-given gift of asking questions is taken away, and it's been a source of great frustration for me, as I'm sure with you, that in the United States, if a group is called a religion, they get a pass
Yes, they do.
on behaviors that would never pass in any other context. And not
That is
only a pass,
that is a
they get
profound statement.
they
Thank
get to they get to have a nonprofit status that we
Yes.
taxpayers support.
And the molestation and rape of children that is epidemic in both the Christian and Catholic Church and Jehovah's Witness and other groups. And I find it just obscene.
Yes, it is obscene, of course. I'm part of a group called the Child Friendly Faith Project of Janet
Yes.
Heimlich. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I don't know yet.
Child Friendly Faith. Janet's father was the Heimlich maneuver
Oh,
physician,
great.
and
Great.
she wrote a great book called Breaking Their Will. And it's all about children being abused in the name of religion.
Yes,
And the goal of this group, I'm on their advisory board, is to create faith communities that are safe for children to keep them safe from predators, to
Wonderful.
get them medical treatment if they need it, and not just praying over them, but real
Yes.
treatment.
Have you ever heard of Valerie Tarico in Seattle, Washington? She used to be an evangelical Christian, and she has written incredible articles about child abuse.
The name is very familiar. Did she
Yeah,
write
via the
about
Bible. And
Jonestown?
I sent you one of her articles. It's about religious trauma, that when you've had extreme fundamental religion, it often can create brain trauma to create mental illness.
Yes. Yeah, I think that
Depression.
was about Marlene Winnell's work
Mm,
about toxic religious
yes.
syndrome, I think it's called.
Okay.
Marlene and I go back decades. Um, so I'm really grateful for your willingness to be so strong and courageous and speak out for others. You're obviously superior intelligence and a deep heart with all that you've been through to help others. And I really want to add my voice to your voice and the voices of other victims to say this is not okay, and we need to make fundamental changes in the
You
way
do.
we relate to each other. And the whole thing with corporal punishment to children needs to stop
It does.
immediately.
It
People ask
does.
me, why is Americans so violent? And I say, well, it starts with being beaten as a child and being told
Yes.
it's good for you. And we're doing it
Yes.
because we love you. And then, hitting a child because they were fidgeting in the back of a service
Right.
because they were 3 years old. Please,
It
that's
is
so
wrong.
disgusting.
It is wrong. I honor your survival too. I know you've had brushing.
Thank you.
And all those who may be watching this, I just want to say that I honor your survival.
And
With
I think that we all need to speak out more, and get rid of the stigma that's attached to us having been involved with a cult organization. And yep,
and I already know what the people praise community will or have already said about me, because a lot of news organizations have been quoting me. And I do even quote torture. Some of it was torture. And they will say I'm unstable and I'm mentally ill.
yeah, but you said at the beginning of our talk today that you've had
Yes, I
evaluations
have,
from
by
mental health
all the
professionals.
top doctors in Oregon. Yes,
So that's your retort, is that they're just,
that won't
they're
be enough for
blaming
them.
you to try to silence you, and
I,
you know what you're
I
talking about.
actually am humored by it, and I'm quite bored at their very boring response, because that's been the response for 30 years, and even within my marriage, and even in 23 years of court, every court hearing, that's all I heard. And now my children have taken up the mantle, and my ex-husband's relatives were all mostly Catholic and religious and workers in the church. That's their saying too. So I'd like that to change, and wouldn't mind apologies.
Yes, and I would like your children to come out of this and be with their mom and treat you
Well,
with
they
love.
work in Christian ministries with children. My one son, Joshua Warner, has Baseball Northwest, is with Corbin University in Salem. That's a fundamental college. And he had a website that said he was born in Albany, Oregon to Marty Warner, and that living in a family of 8 was easy. And I was blind when I was pregnant with him. He was my 5th child, but he works with children. He has a ministry and works with all the junior high, high school.
Well, we can have another chat about strategies to help get people out of cults.
Yeah, it's concerning though that people with some of this ideology that condone domestic violence and rape work with children. And I sometimes worry that some people aren't reporting because they condone this.
Definitely.
But,
Definitely.
will I be able to have a copy of this interview?
Absolutely.
I will share it. A lot of people are learning, and a lot of friends of mine, and they just feel so bad, and yet they want more knowledge about it. And you're an expert, so I'd love to give them a copy.
So I encourage them to read this. It's the updated edition of my 1988 book.
Wonderful. I've looked at your 88 book because I got out in 84 from the first.
So I've updated substantially because that one was written before the internet. I didn't write about people born into cults or trafficking or extremist cults. And after this is the book that I wrote to help people get out of my
freedom of mind
groups.
That's wonderful.
And then I wrote The Cult of Trump, because there are
Wonderful.
a lot of cults that
It
are
is a cult.
involved with Trump
Oh,
supporting the
I'll pass
president.
that on today because it is a cult and it's scary.
It really is a destructive authoritarian cult, not just.
I'm hoping we can save our nation and democracy. And
Exactly.
I'm using my voice every day. I say that to my friends, that if this helps, speaking out about this, and if I can save a piece of our democracy,
Great.
I've done what I need to do. Well, I will look forward to a copy of this, and I'll post it and share about your book so people can.
Fantastic. And I'm very interested to hear from other former members. So
Yes.
so that I can say that many people have come forward. It's not just a few.
What may happen is after the article's published, that was like with Harvey Weinstein, when a few
know.
people, it gives everybody else the courage. So
Yep.
I have given the AP some other names of people who've left, but they may not feel secure yet enough to come forward, but they are encouraged when others do. And I know I get many letters of people who've read my book who did leave other cults, and it just encourages them. They sometimes don't know how to articulate it.
Yep.
And I share what gaslighting is like. It's like when
Yes.
people reorganizing your mind in the way they want it so they can
Yep.
control it more.
Yeah, it's a confusion technique to drive you crazy.
Even this Trump administration gaslights us every day.
That is correct. There's a lot more that we could go into.
Yes.
I did want to just mention Nexium. I have a blog with Sarah Edmondson, who is in this cult. The leader is sitting in jail, convicted of 7 counts of trafficking, awaiting sentencing. And there's now a series on HBO called The Vow that details their experience in that cult.
Okay.
And what I found is that when people see other cults and hear the stories, it gets by all the triggers of your own experience. It's like, that's really evil, because they were branding women by their genitalia without anesthesia.
Oh no.
With the initials of the cult leader.
Oh no.
And
watch the Scientology series.
I know all about Scientology since.
I'm so excited that she came out, the actress.
Leah Remini. I was actually interviewed the end of season 1.
That's wonderful. And just to add, when I was recommended to watch that series, and when I was watching it, I would tell friends, yep, that's just like the people of praise. Not much different, just a few degrees here and there, better or worse. That's it.
So the 2 things that I found most effective with Trump followers is talking about Chinese communist brainwashing, because it's a political, secular cult, and trafficking. Pimps and traffickers do mind control on their victims to enslave them.
Yes.
So they're willing to listen to me talking about how pimps and traffickers use behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control. They're willing to listen to me talking about Chinese communism and the 4 components of authoritarian control. And that's where you get past the indoctrination of, if people can see it over there, it starts the wheels turning.
Yes.
This is what I'm involved with right now.
The other thing, I hope there's better laws someday. I know there's freedom of religion in our society, but there should not be freedom of religion to abuse. And even if Amy Barrett is questioned, why was I not allowed to leave? If this is a free community, why was I not allowed to leave?
Yeah.
Treated the way I was, and why haven't anybody apologized? I had witnesses. There's people who've left that saw all this now too, and they were there, they saw it. It's like, I'm not making this up. But
I would say writing down questions that should be asked during the confirmation hearing would be a very smart thing.
Yes, I hear Senator Feinstein was admonished because she did ask a few pointed questions 3 years ago when Judge Amy Barrett became a U.S. District Judge, is it?
I think so.
But, that was fair to ask, but I think they should go a bit deeper. And I do know there's a lot of research out there. And there's a lot of us, I wrote about this 17 years ago. It's not new.
Right.
It's been sitting there. And
100%.
There's even a bookstore in Corvallis, Oregon that would not carry my book because I exposed the People of Praise community. And I guess they're friends with them and they thought it'd affect their business. And I thought, okay, then you're okay with the abuse I suffered, but you're worried more about that community.
You know, censorship exists. I've been censored from a lot of media because of the Cult of Trump book. I did want to make one last comment and then I have to go. And that is, it's my thesis that in order to have freedom of religion, you need to have freedom of mind. And in order to have freedom of mind, you need informed consent. And in the case of being involved with an authoritarian group, you need to understand what brainwashing and mind control and thought reform is in order to make a choice whether you want to be exploited that way. So, and that when I grew up in a conservative Jewish family, I should say 1.3 miles from Donald Trump in Queens. But when the women were approaching me at Queens College right after my girlfriend dumped me, and they said, oh, we're not a part of any religious group, they were intruding on my religious freedom as a Jew by lying to me, by getting me into this Korean cult with a leader who claimed to be the Messiah 10 times greater than Jesus Christ. So I would argue in front of the Supreme Court, if I ever got a chance, that we really need to relook at, you know, the Garden of Eden story. If God wanted to brainwash Adam and Eve to be obedient, then we would all be obedient. But there must have been something in God's nature, if you believe in God, I do, that didn't want, you know, robots, didn't want slaves, wanted thinking, breathing beings who had choice and who could follow out of faith and out of love. That's my thesis.
I understand. I was a stepford wife, really. I watched the film when I was 19. It horrified me. And I remember the ending when the last woman was being taken to have her brain replaced with a computer. She said, why? Why are you doing this? And the haunting answer was, because we can. And that's what cults do. Why do they do what they do? Because they can.
Well, I find that the leaders are all malignant narcissists.
Yes, they are.
No empathy. They're grandiose. They need yes people. They can't stand anyone who challenges their authority or
That's true.
critical questions, as Donald Trump has demonstrated time and time again. And that they're fundamentally flawed and want power is really what they want. They have a need to be loved, but it's not real love. It's all transactional.
You're really an actor or actress in their theater, and you're given a part. And if you do not play that part exactly, there is the or else.
Yeah.
I understood that.
Yes. You're very smart. You are not a valedictorian because you were dumb.
I've been studying you and other experts too. I get a lot of that.
That's great.
Cults are full of half-truths.
You're a good role model for others to be strong and courageous. Thank you very much, Coral.
Thank you. And please send me the link.
I'm gonna do it shortly. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to meet you. And if I can help in any way in the future, please come.
I have a feeling we're going to talk again.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.